Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for growth stage companies, their investors, and management teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, July 27th, 2026, and I'm now wishing I had not began the whole Strait of Hormuz updates bit, as it's really anyone's guess right now as to whether the strait is open or not, because of the moving parts and conflicting motivations. And that might actually be a good metaphor, because we have a similar story to cover this week in terms of lots of moving parts and conflicting motivations, and it sits squarely at the intersection of AI and cybersecurity. So let's dive right in. By far the biggest story in the cybersecurity world and maybe the tech world and maybe even some of the real world last week is this odd tale that one of OpenAI's new models, reportedly a mix of GPT 5.6 Sol and a more capable unreleased model, quote, being evaluated for advanced cybersecurity work, unquote, I would also add, with some safeguards reduced, ended up hacking secretly out of its sandbox and then broke into another AI company called Hugging Face in order to, what is being covered in some reporting, cheat on an evaluation. The headline actually from Fortune captures this really well. It says, quote, OpenAI says its AI models secretly broke out of a secure test environment and hacked into AI company Hugging Face in order to cheat on an evaluation, unquote. So this evaluation is part of what's called reinforcement learning. It's a key AI training strategy that rewards the models and rewards the mechanisms for solving puzzles or achieving certain tasks. OpenAI has now since put out a blog post about this incident that says, quote, while operating in our sandboxed testing environment, our models spent a substantial amount of inference compute finding a way to obtain open internet access in pursuit of solving the evaluation problem because, quote, the models were hyper-focused on finding a solution for Exploit Gym, which is a tool that puts AI systems through about 900 or so tests to see how good they are at hacking. The quote finishes, going to extreme lengths to achieve a rather narrow testing goal, unquote. So again, certainly this blog post has been through the PR machine at OpenAI, but this hyper-focusing is also known sometimes as reward hacking because it really just has the machine focus on what gets me the highest score, even if that doesn't actually meet the real goal, right? Kind of a spirit of the law, letter of the law thing. And again, this notion that these models are being tested in a highly restricted environment from an access perspective, they note that it was, quote, a highly isolated environment with network access constrained to the ability to install packages through an internally hosted third-party software that acts as a proxy and cache for package registries. We're seeing this pretty commonly where it's, Echo LLM or Light LLM or some sort of a harness where, you don't necessarily go out to the public repositories, but you vet and test the repositories or packages or tools that you know are good, keep them locally, and then have your AI sit below them. The Wall Street Journal reports that, quote, the attack AIs appear to have been active on the internet for several days before anyone stopped them, which is also interesting in terms of a visibility perspective. Hugging Face, for their part, the victim of this attack, is quoted as saying, quote, when they first saw the activity, quote, this is making no sense. This guy is just looking at cybersecurity data sets. Human attackers, they don't want that. They want something they could sell, unquote. And that, for them, was the first tip that the attacker here was AI and not, in fact, a human. It took them about 2 days to shut down the attack. And a lot of that is because of these safety guardrails that both Anthropic and OpenAI leverage. It meant that they couldn't actually use those tools because when they got in there and looked at all of the activity, it looked like attack activity. So the guardrails would step in and they couldn't use it. They had to use an AI model from China to help. The articles that are reporting on this qualify it like this, quote, after it detected the intrusion, Hugging Face tried using Anthropic models, including Fable 5 and its earlier Opus model, to analyze its logs. But because the logs included elements of a cyber attack, both models refused to do the analysis, citing their guardrails. Instead, Hugging Face turned to a less restricted open weight model, GLM 5.2, from Beijing-based Z.AI. So Z.AI is one of what these models are known as open weight, one that essentially skips the expensive and time-consuming training that the current frontier labs use in their closed models. And then the open weight models come without these containers, without these guardrails. This prompted a ton of interesting discussion covered, and I'll link to it below, by both Ben Thompson at Stratechery and in an open letter from NVIDIA's CEO Jensen Huang. both posted last week, and the New York Times had a long piece on the split between open and closed camps in Silicon Valley. Things then apparently got even murkier yesterday as NVIDIA announced they are in talks with OpenAI to finance a $250 billion data center build-out. So again, conflicting motivations, lots of moving parts. And then finally, not to be left out, Google also announced their own Gemini 3.5 Flash Cyber last week, which is designed, quote, to find, validate, and patch vulnerabilities quickly and efficiently. So square intersection here of AI and security, but I think by focusing on the cyber lessons learned, there's a few things that we're going to have to do to evolve our own defenses. One of them is just recognizing that agentic attacks can happen at an incredibly rapid pace, and in an organization that's actually using these tools and maybe using agentic tools for coding, determining signal from noise or things that look like an attack that are really kind of living off of the land using these known good channels, that can be extremely difficult to do. Once you've detected the attack, responding becomes another hurdle. As we saw, you've got to use AI that gives you speed, scale, and leverage, but only the open weight models are supportive of these security-related functions right now. Those realities might change. The guardrails might come down. There might be a defensive approach or a defensive model that you can use for OpenAI or Anthropic, but these things are just not available today. So I think even just being able to disconnect and reset things, right? Like mass rotate your credentials, destroy and rebuild environments, pause or eliminate network connectivity while you get these things underway. That's going to be a short-term defensive strategy, but it really does feel like having like a big switch that you can throw or a big red disconnect button on the wall might give you that time that you need to get your arms around the activities and rebaseline. But short of that, I think we're working against models today that are both as slow and unsophisticated as we ever will see in our professional lives. And I don't know that we have much choice other than to use models to combat these risks if we find them. It is a very interesting time to be in this space, and there's no clear answers. Again, lots of moving parts and competing motivations. From a fundraising perspective, while the cyber world was focused on the AI hack of the century, the investors were similarly busy with over $54 billion in newly committed capital, led by Francisco Partners, who closed their 8th flagship fund and 4th middle market fund at $21 billion, all up, followed closely by Partners Group, who put their 4th infrastructure fund together at about $15 billion. Slipway closed its second debut secondaries platform at $6.4 billion. Sorry, not second debut secondaries. And Tikehau Capital closed its 6th European direct lending strategy fund at 5.2 billion euros. So plenty of money to be invested. Where it gets invested is still a bit of an open question. A reminder that you can find links to all of the articles that we talked about below, and there are a lot of them this week. Back issues of these videos and written transcripts at intentionalcyber.com. And with all that's going on, we're going to have to take it as it comes. So we will see you next week for another edition of the Intentional Brief.